it's Father's Day, and there's this, like I saw this, it was like a meme floating around about what they do in churches, and it's kind of funny because we're doing the exact same thing, where on Mother's Day, you get like 5 reasons why your mom's the best mom ever, and then like Father's Day is like 10 ways you can be a better dad. Like, it's kind of funny how that goes. And so like for us, now Mother's Day was a drive-in service, but Mother's Day we're like, hey, we're gonna talk about the Queen of Sheba. She met Solomon, and she was this really godly woman that we can emulate, and there's family pictures, and it's just like, oh, this is fun. And Father's Day, we're looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 12, where essentially it just says, you're going to die, and this is what it's going to be like when you die. So happy Father's Day. It's okay. I think it's good to look at this stuff. We're giving you a car wash as our way of saying sorry. But hey, we are glad to have you here, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And so when you do what I do for a living, you have to start trying to find like metaphors and illustrations just about anywhere that you can. Like when I get up here and I speak, I have about 2,500 to 3,000 words depending on the topic. And so you do that 45 times a year, like that's a ton of words and a ton of pages. And so you really have to like search for ways to like help for ways to make the text connect. And so one of the ways over the years where I have found inspiration is when I listen to people who don't know Jesus express a longing that Jesus answers. And sometimes I find it so interesting because I'm like, man, if only someone would tell this person, like, there's an answer to what you're saying. And one of the places where I found this particularly over the years has been, honestly, with music. And there's this song, it's called 7 Years by Lucas Graham. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. Came out probably like 5 or 6 years ago. And it's a very interesting song, but the song is Lucas Graham looking at his life. And as he looks at his life, he gets to the end. And when he gets to the end, he asks a question. And it's a question that the book of Ecclesiastes actually addresses, but this is the question that he asks. He says, soon I'll be 60 years old. I think when he wrote this song, he was probably in his early 20s. Will I think the world is cold, or will I have a lot of children who can warm me? It's not talking about physical warmth, it's talking about the warmth that you feel in your heart. Soon I will be 60 years old. Now, he's looking at his life and he's saying, okay, so when I am 60, how am I going to see the world? Am I going to be that person? And we've met these people, right, who at the end of their lives, they're full of joy. You're just like, man, I just like to be around them. Like there's like just this joy that you feel when you come into prison. There's some that you don't, right? Like there's some you meet and you're like, oh. And he's like, what am I going to be? And the book of Ecclesiastes, in Ecclesiastes 12, verses 1 through 8, what it shows us is it shows us why people, once they reach a certain point in their life, why they think the world is cold. And it's because there's something about age and adding years that makes life more difficult. And so the author of Ecclesiastes, who we believe is Solomon, he's writing this at the end of his life, at the end of his reign as king, and he looks at life as it's coming to the end, and he pens these verses. And I want to read them to you. I'm going to read them to you all as a whole because they're poetic, and I want you to kind of feel the poetry, and then we'll go through line by line and just look at what he has to say. But this is Ecclesiastes 12, verses 1 through 8. It says, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. In the day when the keeper of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed. And the doors on the street are shut when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of a song are brought low. They are afraid of what is high and the tares in the way. The almond tree blossoms, and the grasshopper drags itself along. And desire fails because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel is broken at the cistern. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to the God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all his vanity. This is Solomon at the end of his life, kind of looking at his body, looking at what's coming, just aware of a reality that is before him. And it's tough. And it's tough because we've been asking the question, well, what is life? What is life? How do I find meaning? How do I find purpose? And the truth is that you can't answer that question without looking at the end. And this is something that we like to avoid. That even in the medical community, that when someone dies, doctors are instructed in using the word death or dead, because if those words aren't used, people will want to argue with the diagnosis, and there's no arguing with that diagnosis. They'll think that there's more that could have been done. And so those words, they help people see the reality of what has happened. And so Solomon, he paints this picture, this harsh reality, and the hope is that as we look at this text, that we would finish with longing that our hearts would return to the God who made us. That this is what he wants us to do. But in order to see this text, so we're going to get to the good part, okay? We're going to finish by talking about the good part. But to get to the good part, you got to realize how bad the bad part is. And so we're just going to kind of drill this hole in this bad part, and then I promise it's going to zoom out and you're going to be okay, but it's going to get kind of dark, and that's going to be all right. So first, let's just look at the harsh reality that is presented here in the text. First, if you look at verse 1, it says, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you say, I have no pleasure in them." That Solomon, last week we talked about what he said when he said, "Rejoice in your youth, let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth." And the idea here is that this is something that you want to learn when you're young, because it's going to become more and more challenging to do the older you get. That if you can figure out how to do this when you're young, when life gets more challenging, you're going to have that muscle exercise and you're going to know what to do. Because the truth of our existence is that our bodies decay. That I think that Puff Daddy would say, "Mo birthdays, mo problems." There's something about age that comes and it's just it's hard. And I think that Solomon is using hyperbole here when he says that there's no pleasure in the years when you see the end coming. But he's just saying, train yourself to be aware of your Creator. Train yourself to be aware of the one who made you. And just so we're clear, that's Jesus Christ. He is the one who can help you get through those years. Because what we see here is there are some challenges that come. I mean, one of them you see there in verse 2 where he says, "Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain." This is Solomon at the end of his life. as a king, possibly the greatest king in the history of Israel. And he's looking at his life and he's realizing, when I die, I will be forgotten like everyone else. He's realizing that when I die, life will continue to move on without me, even though I've been so great. I don't know if you've ever experienced anything, it's like something tragic in your life, but isn't it hard when you do and you interact with people who just are living their life like nothing happened? Like you experience something that you're going to remember the rest of your life. And you're interacting with someone who, and it's like you don't even realize what just happened to me. I remember when my cousin passed away. It was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And my sister and I, we went right after church to Weeping Water, Nebraska. It's a town of about 1,000 people. And because it's about a 5.5 hour drive, we wore comfortable clothes on our way to see my cousin's visitation. And we get in Weeping Water, Nebraska. There's one gas station in town, and my cousin was young, and so it was very tragic that he passed. And we go in the gas station to get dressed to go to this visitation, and we walk in, and it was weird. Because when we walked in, the clerk is sitting there watching court TV. There are kids just running around trying to figure out what type of candy they want, trying to negotiate with their parents, maybe the ability to get 2 pieces of candy. You've got a guy who is looking at the refrigerator, stressing way too much over what type of Powerade he should be drinking. And I walk in, and my heart's heavy because I'm getting ready to face the fact that my cousin isn't around anymore. And in his town, people are completely unscathed. That's some of what Solomon's talking about. That the older you get, that as life moves on, you're going to experience moments like that, where you think everything should stop because everything stops for you, but it doesn't stop for everyone else. It's tough. But the sun will continue to rise, the clouds will continue to give rain. And so he looks at that, and then he shifts and he starts talking not just about like this general thing, but our bodies. And look at what he says. He says, in the days when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors of the street are shut. When the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of songs are brought low. Most commentators would agree this is talking about different parts of our body. He's using illustrations to talk about kind of what happens to your body with age. There where he talks about the keepers of the house tremble, he's talking about how as you get older, your hands that used to be steady, they start to shake. I don't know if you're familiar with the show Downton Abbey. That's how this show ends with Carson. That he's unable to do the job that he loved to do because he was no longer able to do it, and it was because his hand shook. That with age, you used to be able to keep it steady, but you can't. It also talks about how strong men are bent. And the picture there is that the older you get, the more your body isn't able to handle its weight. And so where you used to be able to walk upright with no issue, now your posture looks different. And he's like, that's something that you can expect with age. And then he talks about the grinders cease their grinding. He's talking about your teeth. And thank God that we live in 2020 where like there's advances in modern dentistry. But back then there wasn't. And so your teeth would just fall out. And it's hard to eat without teeth, or at least that's what I've been told. Someone said amen. I'm sorry. And then he says the windows of your eye, or your windows are dimmed. He's talking about how your eyesight goes away. This is not only just something that you see in the Old Testament that he's talking about. This is a reality that I'm sure a lot of us have experienced, but this is something that the New Testament doesn't shy away from either. Look at what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says this, he says that our outer self is wasting away. And it doesn't matter how old you are. You've experienced this, right? I remember, not that long ago, I had to office from home. And I remember I sat in my kitchen. I officed 8 hours a day in my kitchen, on my kitchen chair. Didn't think anything of it. Until about, 2 days into it, I realized that those chairs, you're not meant to sit on those all day. I remember I woke up on Thursday morning, and I'm like, why is my back on fire? I haven't done anything. I've been home. And why is this hurting my knee? Because you're not made to do that. You're not made to sit there. A couple weeks ago, I painted my shed. And I used a small brush to get the corners. It looks horrible, but that's okay. It's a shed. No one cares. So I remember at the end of it, my hand was shaking. There were things I couldn't open because my hand had to get used to that. I used a roller to paint the big parts, and I woke up and my shoulder was hurt. That this is part of age. This is what happens. The things that you used to be able to do, you're not able to do them in the same way. And that's not even talking about eating. I used to be able to eat whatever I wanted. And now if I have Chinese food for lunch, I have to take a nap. I don't know why, but it's just something I got to do. And this is what he's saying. This is what you can expect. Happy Father's Day. That our outer self is wasting away. And then he points out this thing, and I think this is just Solomon poking at you. Okay, look at this, what he says about the one rises up at the sound of the bird. He says, and the doors on the street are shut when the grinding is low and one rises up at the sound of the bird. He's saying, okay, so you're going to get older. You're not going to hear as well. You're going to have a lot of conversations that are you going, sorry, what? Excuse me? I'm sorry, what? And you're going to struggle. You're going to have to learn how to read lips. But in the morning, when you want to sleep, that bird's going to wake you up outside your window. He's like, it doesn't make sense. Where it would be an advantage is no longer an advantage. He's like, this is what. He just keeps going. Look at this in verse 5. He says, then they're also afraid of what is high. And terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms. The grasshopper drags itself along. Desire fails because man is going to his eternal home. And the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. He's talking about being up on high. He's talking about the fear of falling. We were talking to a teaching team, and someone said, they were like, I didn't realize why it was such a big deal when I was a kid when someone called and said, Grandma fell. I had a conversation actually with my father-in-law yesterday, and he was talking about his grandmother, and he said that she was perfectly fine, strong as an ox until she fell. And when she did, that was the beginning of the end of her life. But the picture here, it talks about that word terrors. What's the terror talking about? It's talking about how things that you used to just be able to move past, you can't move past them anymore. Things that used to not be a big deal are now fatal. They're now devastating. They bring weight. There's a different thing that comes with them. That's the picture. He's saying, you're going to realize that you're not the person you used to be. I really like the way that Derek Kidner, in his commentary on the book of Ecclesiastes, explains verse 6. And just look at this here. He says, the pictures of verse 6 capture the beauty and the fragility of the human frame. A masterpiece as delicately wrought as any work of art, yet breakable as a piece of earthenware, and as useless in the end as a broken wheel. I'm going to argue this is the beauty of the book. Because who do you trust? Do you trust the person who looks at you in the face when you know everything is falling apart and says, it's okay? Or do you trust the person who looks at you in the face and says, nope, this is really hard? This is Solomon. He's looking at you and he loves you enough to tell you the truth. And as we look at what he is saying, here's what we see. That life under the sun, without the sun, is going to have ups, and it's going to have downs, and it's going to end in despair. The nice thing for us is we have the gospel. That without the gospel, this is not a great, but with the gospel, with the blanks that we're able to fill in about Jesus Christ, this text that is a downer becomes something that's actually pretty beautiful. And so let's look at the gospel's hope. So you see a little bit of the scarlet thread here in the first verse of this section, and in the last verse. Look at this here. It says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And then he says that the Spirit returns to the God who gave it. Now, as it's talking about remembering, that's our language doesn't capture it necessarily like it does in the original Hebrew. And the idea there is actually far stronger in the original. This is the way the commentator Derek Kidner says it. He says, for our part, to remember him is no perfunctory or purely mental act. It is to drop our pretense of self-sufficiency and commit ourselves to him. That it talks about doing this in the days of your youth, but this is a good muscle to develop when you're young, because when you get older, it's going to be more of a challenge. You have more things that will be maybe difficult to wrap your mind around. And the reason why there's such an emphasis on youth, it helps you to see why we care so much about kids in youth ministry. Because we want them to learn these things when they're young, so that when they're older and things become difficult, just naturally difficult, they've learned to remember their Creator in the days of their youth. It's not just worth your youth, it's worth all of your life. And the way that we do this now is we do this by putting our hope in Jesus Christ. That we do this now through a relationship with him. And really what this text, this harsh reality, should cause us to look at is it should cause us to evaluate, okay, where are we with him? How are things with us and Jesus? And really the way you evaluate is by looking at your relationship with him. How is it doing? Would you say that when you think about your life, is there a part of you that looks at it and realizes that you'll never be able to live up to God's standard? How do you respond to that? Do you respond to that by justifying behaviors that don't please him? Do you respond to that by making all kinds of excuses? Or do you look at him and look at you and say, dear God, forgive me of my sins? Jesus, you were perfect when I'm not. Forgive me. But here's the thing, like, this is where a lot of times people stop. But you got to ask yourself, do you live your life in a way that says, I prayed that and I meant it? Like, do you live your life in a way that says, Jesus is my king and I'll do whatever he says, and when I don't, I'm going to ask him to forgive me for not doing it? And then you got to look and you got to say, okay, so where is your hope? Like, the text is saying, don't put it in your body. Like, where is your hope? Is your hope that there was a man who lived a perfect life and died on a cross for you, and that in his death, he conquered something that you couldn't have conquered, which is death, and because he did, you'll be able to do the same? That when we talk about remembering him, like that is the picture. That is how we do that in the New Testament. That is how we do that with the lens of the gospel. And if we do that, this text that's a bummer, that's difficult, that's like, oh man, really? It actually ends up being kind of beautiful and amazing. I'll put that verse back up from 1 Corinthians where it says the reality that that they're talking about, where it says our outer self is wasting away. No one questions that. It's a bummer. Some of you might even be feeling that right now. But that's actually not the whole story that Paul's telling there. It's part of it. But look at how he surrounds it with the gospel. In verse 16, he says, so we do not lose heart. Like everything that we talked about in Ecclesiastes is reason to lose heart. But Paul says we don't lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. It's like, yep, your outer self, it's gonna decay. But here's the beauty of the gospel is that inwardly, Christ, through the power of the Holy Spirit, can renew you. Look at this. For this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And as we look not to the things that are seen, but to things that are unseen. Our body is something that's seen. But because of the gospel, we can look to things that are unseen. For things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. We have, like everything around us is reason to lose heart. Everything around us is reason to give up, to be hopeless. But Paul's able to say, no, there's more. And because of your hope, that there is more. You can look at the grim reality of all of our fate, and you can do so that says, I want my spirit to go to the God who made it. I love this quote from Thomas Boston as I close. He says this. He says, in the day of his birth, he was born to die. And in the day of his death, he dies to live. That this is our hope. This is why we can look head first at something that is incredibly challenging. And we can do so with joy. Because we can know that when we die, it's not like everybody else. But that we have a hope that goes beyond us. And if that's where we are, then that day comes when we get older. We don't have to think that the world is cold. But instead we'll have a gospel that can warm us. So where is your hope? Where do you put your trust? When there's nowhere else to turn, where do you turn? When you have nothing else to think about, what do you think about? When you tell yourself that everything is going to be okay, why do you tell yourself that everything is going to be okay? If it's not Jesus, then there's no guarantee.